If you have a true scary story you'd like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And as always, thank you. My 3-year-old son suffered from chronic ear infections last year, which led to him having high fevers. I slept with him on this particular night because I needed to give him Tylenol throughout the night to keep his fever down and keep him comfortable. I set my alarm to wake me up at around 2:30 a.m. When I woke up, I went into the kitchen to get the Tylenol. I noticed a bright light shining into the apartment from our deck door, which also illuminated part of the woods behind my apartment. When I went over to see what it was, it turned out to be a car with those bright LED headlights in the parking lot to the far back right of the apartment. I figured they were dropping someone off. I saw the movement of what resembled a dog walking around near the woods. I started to think that the lady who usually walks her dog, a cute little corgi, in that area purposely faced her car in that direction so she could see while she walked her dog. As it got closer, I realized that there was nobody out there walking a dog, and there was no dog. I don't know what it was I saw, but I'll describe it in the best way that I can. At first, it looked just like a dog, corgi-sized, but as it walked closer, it looked like your average house cat. Then it looked like a black bear, and then it looked like a koala. I live in North New Jersey, farmland and lots of woods, and there are no wild koalas here. At this point, my heart is pounding out of my chest, and I'm scared. The fear I felt was like a primal type of fear that I have never felt before. I ran to my bedroom to wake up my boyfriend, and I shook him awake very roughly. I said, "You gotta come see this." He was a bit annoyed with me. When we look outside together, we see this thing getting closer, and it looks like a skunk now. White stripe down the center with the perky, fluffy tail. I said, "Oh, it's just a skunk," with a little chuckle. I felt a bit embarrassed that I woke him up over a damn skunk, but at that moment I also felt relieved. However, I was mistaken. As it walked, it looked as if it was struggling to find a form. I thought it looked like it was falling apart, but also coming back together again at the same time. I know this doesn't make sense, but it's hard to find the words for what we saw. After the skunk formation, it looked like a person crawling on the ground with some type of fur or skin attached to them around the legs. Then it changed again and looked like a raccoon, groundhog, black bear, cat, koala, deer, and skunk. The part that stuck out to me the most was that, whatever it was, it seemed to be coming apart or shedding, but at the same time, it was growing. Whoever had their headlights on turned them off as it went deeper into the woods. This happened pretty quickly. I'd say it was only a couple of minutes from start to finish. He ended up going back to bed, but I couldn't sleep after that, so I grabbed a flashlight and shined it into the woods to see if I could see it again. But it was gone. I also opened the door to see if I could hear anything, but I couldn't. It was very quiet. I had a hard time going back to sleep that night. My boyfriend wasn't scared, but he was confused and stunned. He didn't know what to make of it. I was scared and creeped out. I know if I hadn't woken him up to see it for himself, he most likely would not have believed me, and would have chalked it up to me being groggy from just waking up, or it just being an animal. Unfortunately, I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. So, to give you a little bit of background information on this story, which is 100% true, I would like to start with the fact that I am European. I posted another story a couple of months back about something that happened to me in Tuscany, Italy. As for me and my friends in this story, we are from Spain. And when this happened, the end of September 2023, we were fairly new to the USA. I moved here a while back for law school, and so did my friends. We'd been living here for a few months and decided to explore the nature of this beautiful continent, as we all live in NYC. So, long story short, we decided to go on a road trip to Canada, drive around Lake Ontario, and then drive back to NYC through upstate New York. I'm a male and my friends were 3 females. For the sake of anonymity, let's call them Lisa, Anna, and Charlotte. Everything went super smooth until the last night. So, for our last night, we had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were like half an hour drive from Harrisburg, I think. Me and Lisa had decided to spend one night in this cabin because it was one with nature. The cabin was super old, made from log wood, and there was no running water or electricity. Both me and Lisa had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I, for myself, had been a Boy Scout my whole life, and even was a scout leader for a while. Our other 2 friends were, as much as I loved them, purebred city girls. They had pretty much zero experience with camping, or to just be in a place where there is no service for the phones, as was the case in this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m., and it was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost internet connection with the GPS, and so I had to drive to the cabin on intuition, paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safe on these muddy trails. It was also rainy the whole day. On the way there, Anna and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment they lost phone service, they got pretty uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, we all saw a campfire. But there were no houses around, nor people. Just a campfire. A well-organized one, since the fire was not spreading, and it was not as big as a bonfire. It kind of startled all of us, as this was a little bit weird since there was no one around, and we were really deep in the forest already. Plus, it was getting very late. When this happened, we also reached the end of the trail, and we figured we had taken the wrong trail at the crossroads before. So I turned around, and we were on our way again. Half an hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later, we finally had arrived at our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this god-forsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you an idea of how old it was, the bathroom was made out of wood and was outside the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining, and both Anna and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car and to get into the cabin with 0 lights. So, me and Lisa left the lights of the car on and went inside the cabin, while also using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see if we could find any old flashlights, which we did, and to see if we could turn on the fireplace, which we didn't, because all the wood was still wet from the rain and it seemed as if no one had prepared dry wood anywhere. So, with a couple of old flashlights and a small improvised fire I managed to make in the stove, we all 4 got in the cabin and I started to make some pasta for us. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows since it was already cold in this part of the state. The cabin had a small ladder which led to an elevated room/space, with a bed where all 3 of the girls could fit in, and I would sleep downstairs, in a bunk bed that seemed older than the First World War. While making pasta, Anna, one of the city girls, came up to me and, knowing that both Lisa and Charlotte did not like to hear anything scary at night, told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had seen a figure walking around there. I first laughed it off as nothing. As I mentioned in my previous story, I do not consider myself a big believer of scary stuff. Being from Spain, we take promises very serious. To swear on God is very serious for us, and she swore to God that she was not lying. I told her then that I believed her, but that there was no need to panic, as I would lock all the doors when we would go to sleep. We had some pasta, managed to make a couple of s'mores, which are lovely by the way, and drank a couple of beers, or at least I did. They all had just one. I can assure you that I am not drunk after a couple of beers, and that I would never start to hallucinate. Just saying in case anyone thinks that I saw stuff because of the beer. They all three went to sleep pretty early after finishing the s'mores and their beer, and I considered that I really love the outdoors and that I don't really mind a little bit of rain. Then I decided to take my last beer and flashlight outside to the front porch, which was also very old and made of wood, and I sat myself down with my beer while enjoying the sound of rain and the lovely sight of not seeing a single light in the distance. I could greatly appreciate this, coming from NYC, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was nothing much really to see, besides a lot of trees and a small creek a little further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain, and the running water down in the creek. That was until I suddenly heard what I would describe as a weird roar. The first thing that came to mind was a bear. But I had researched well before our trip, and I knew bears were not common at all in this part of the state. I also know what a bear roar would sound like, and it did not resemble a lot, except for the fact that it was a really deep roar, if you get what I mean. Startled but not really scared, I continued to scan the rest of the forest for as far as I could see from the porch. It was then when my eye caught the glimpse of a figure, well hidden deep into the tree line. I would describe the figure as tall. As a reference, I'm 6'4", and I thought this thing was at least a foot or two higher than me. It was well hidden because with its brown fur, that's what I think it was at the least, or the skin in any case, blended in well with the trees in autumn. It was definitely aware of our presence, as I saw two eyes glimpsing into my flashlight. I could not tell you what it was, but I swear to God that it was not a bear. It was bipedal, and had rather long arms, I would say. We looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was more like 5 seconds before it vanished behind a tree, and I heard another roar. It was then when I felt all of my hair stand up, and I was definitely very much scared. I went inside as quick as I could, and locked all the doors and closed all the curtains. I quickly went to bed and tried to wave it off as just my exhaustion of driving all day, playing tricks on my mind. But I promise you that this was very real. After an hour or so, I had calmed down and finally fell asleep. The rest of the night was uneventful, and the next morning when I went to relieve myself after having drank the beer the night before, the weather had cleared and it was rather sunny, and as far as I could see, the forest was calm and beautiful. No sight of any animals or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning, and left for our way back to the city that never sleeps. And so ends also my story of that night. I never talked about what I saw that night because I know that all 3 girls did not like to hear scary stories. And I figured, after these months, that this was the best place to share it. If anyone has an idea of what it could have been, feel free to enlighten me, especially if it's backed up with rational reasoning. I'm really new to these parts of Reddit and paranormal, so I'll try to describe my story as good as I can. One day, probably around 5 to 6 years ago, I was in the final years of elementary, and around 14 to 15-year-old me and a few of my friends went to this sort of lake a few kilometers away from our town/village. We rode on bikes. It usually took us around 25 minutes to get to the water, and to get there, you had to go through this road that was crossing a local ranch/farm. Me and my best friend went ahead of the group because we were faster, and we decided that we would wait for the rest at the crossroads of the ranch and the 2 roads leading into the woods. We stopped at the crossroads, looked around for a few minutes, and when we looked at the direction of the road leading deep into the woods, we saw something. I got shocked. My heart ached from the eeriness that I felt. I saw a creature that looked like a large black horse head with a sort of black cloak, and after a few seconds, the creature disappeared. After the years, I can't remember if it just vanished in the blink of an eye or ran away, but when we looked back at each other to make sure if the other one saw it as well, we both were scared as hell, and confirmed we both saw it. We decided to go further to look at the road where the creature was at, because the road was kind of on a hill, so we didn't see behind it too much, because it went right down after a few meters. It was gone, nowhere to be seen, so it completely erased the possibility that it was just a horse from the ranch, even though we knew it looked nothing like a regular horse. When the others caught up, we didn't say anything because no one would believe us. Or maybe we did. I don't remember much after that. And then I almost forgot about this whole incident until a few months back, when I saw some TikToks with my girlfriend about skinwalkers and wendigos. When I remembered that day and the creature, I instantly started to freak out on the inside. Could that creature be something like that? I searched up that wendigos are Native American mythology, and they probably aren't in Europe, Central or Eastern. So, what was that then? Today I reunited with a few of my friends from elementary and with my old best friend, and I brought this up, to see if he still remembers. He said he does. A black horse-headed giant thing. I got the chills because I realized it really did happen back then, and I have a witness. So, I decided to finally address this thing, and this sub seemed like the place for it. If you have any ideas of what this could have been, I would appreciate any help. Hello everyone. I live in rural Southwest Virginia, in Appalachia, and heard odd whistling in the woods a few days ago at night. It started when I was playing airsoft alone in the woods at about 7 p.m. in almost pitch black. I live a lonely existence, and was walking around the woods behind my house. I got to a clearing just on top of a hill and sat down to take a rest. Just when I sat down, I heard odd whistling. It was perfect whistling, and whistled a tune that I had never heard before. It was clear and it sounded close, within 150 feet or less, and came directly from behind me. It would have had to have been in the woods, and near the property line with one of our neighbors. It instantly gave me the chills down my back, and I got the feeling of being watched. I, not being an idiot and having a brain, wasted no time in sprinting full speed down towards my house, hopping over rocks and limbs. The whistling stopped shortly after I got moving, but I still felt like I was being watched, and like something was off. I didn't see anything, when I did turn back to look while opening a gate, that is, but that may be because of the darkness and the distance I had moved. I don't think it was a bird, as the leaves on the trees haven't regrown yet and it still stays cold at night and sometimes during the day. But I don't know much about birds. There were also no birds to be seen and everything else was quiet. I also doubt that it was a person, as I heard no talking, no leaves crunching, no other noises. I should also mention the whistling started out of nowhere, and did not gradually get louder as if someone or something was moving closer while whistling. I should also mention that I've been in those woods a decent amount of my life, and have never heard anything like it before, not even once. I was a bit tired, but I've been more tired before while being up in those woods at similar times, and I'm not one to hallucinate. The situation still gives me the chills when I think about it. I've had the feeling of being watched before in those woods, but those feelings have never been so intense and extreme as that one night. I was hoping that someone could know what it was. Was it an animal? Maybe. But me and my family, have dogs around the house, and most wild animals stay away. And I haven't really seen anything outside of a bear or two and some deer in the woods. I should also mention the dogs occasionally bark randomly into the woods, but they weren't really barking at that moment when the whistling happened. I was hoping that someone could identify what it was. Maybe, if there's even enough information. And I'm not saying that it was paranormal, but I'm not saying that it was just a wild animal either. Also, apologies for typing so much. I just want to make sure that all the details are included. I should also mention that the neighbors aren't exactly close, and they would have no reason to be out in the woods at night. No known trail cams or anything like that. So, this isn't something I witnessed. I was told this story by one of the men who allegedly saw it. For context, this guy had run with some questionable crowds, and did what jobs he had to do to make money at times, if you get my drift. So he has a lot of stories. I mostly consider this a tall tale, but there is still enough of it that makes me wonder, what if? According to him, we'll call him Zed for the sake of the story, he had been finishing up some work down in Louisiana back in the late 1990s, with his buddy, and had a few days to kill. Namely to get some fishing and hunting in, albeit out of season. One of the guys they had worked with gave them directions to a spot way back in the swamps and marshes, or the bayou as it's more commonly called, where they could do that without risking being caught by fish and game agents. He said that one of the best things about the spot was that there were, oddly enough, never any alligators there. Bit of a red flag, that one. Anyways, one fine morning they set out in their boat before the sun was up, navigating their way through the swamps. From what he described, this was a section that was close to the Mississippi border, routes used by smugglers to move various products across state lines. They finally arrived at the spot after a few hours and some detours, their way of not saying they got lost, and turned off the motor of their boat and started fishing. The trees were just thick enough to prevent you from being seen from overhead, and they were essentially in a huge inlet that was somewhat sheltered by the rest of the bayou, and had the start of solid land along two sides of it. By solid land, that also meant you had to walk across 10 to 15 feet of muck that could suck your boots off before you got to the solid ground. So, according to Zed, the day was progressing and fishing was not going great. But they still had beer, so they weren't inclined to go anywhere. They both noted that, as the guy had said, there were no alligators. Normally you could spot them lurking around, or sunning themselves, but they were just utterly gone from the spot, as were most of the big fish, it seemed. It was at this point that they observed a herd of feral hogs emerge from the undergrowth on one side of the lagoon and make their way to the muck that was described before, and commence to start rolling and rooting in it to their heart's content. Zed and his buddies slowly angled their boat closer, as they had sidearms with them and certainly had no issues with getting wild pork instead of fish if the opportunity was there. The hogs were leery but not afraid, keeping the humans in their line of sight as they frolicked. Zed saw that they had no real way to get to a hog if they shot it there, so they just floated along and watched for a good opportunity. But instead, they saw something else entirely. According to Zed, that's when they saw the mud start to move. He knew instantly that it was not an alligator, as an alligator would be flailing around in the mud trying to reach the hogs. And whatever this thing was, it was covered in mud. The only way he could describe it was something was pushing its way through the muck, like a mostly submerged bulldozer, creeping up on the pigs. They watched as it slowly approached a cluster of hogs who had noticed the movement, but seemed more curious about what it was than afraid. One of them, a pig that Zed estimated was between 150 to 175 pounds, was the furthest out in the muck, and made the mistake of attempting to sniff at whatever this intruder was. Zed said that quicker than they could react, something lunged out from the thing and attached to the pig's head and face. As the pig thrashed and tried to jump back, letting out the most blood-curdling scream they'd ever heard, the thing was hauled partially out of the muck and came into better view. Zed realized it was an alligator snapping turtle of proportions that he had never heard of. He's seen the one they keep at Bass Pro Shop that got big enough that it cracked its tank, and they had to get a new one. And he said that was like comparing a chihuahua to a pit bull. It was still partially obscured by the muck that was covering it, but Zed swore its shell had to be at least the size of a hood from a Volkswagen Beetle. He was an extreme car enthusiast, so he knew his vehicles. His best guess on its weight was that it was well over 500 pounds, and was now backing up into deeper water, dragging the pig with it. Zed said from what they could see, the turtle's head was so big that it was able to fit its jaws partially around the pig's skull, and its beak was now essentially acting as a meat hook. Apparently it was about a 30-second fight to drag the pig out of the lagoon, but Zed said it was clear the pig never had a chance. The turtle dragged it out into the water, and the pig made one last desperate attempt to break free. Apparently hearing something screaming underwater one last time is as unnerving as you would imagine, and Hollywood does not get the sound right. It then just went absolutely quiet after that. According to Zed, he and his buddy sat there for a minute processing what they had seen, and except for the froth on top of the water and the stirred-up mud, there was no sign that anything had just happened. The other hogs had fled as soon as their comrade was attacked, and except for some bugs, it was almost completely silent. They couldn't say why, but Zed said they booked it out of there, that something was off, and it felt wrong to be there. It wasn't like they could go to Fish and Game and describe what they saw, but they did fill in their acquaintance on why there were no alligators in that area. As far as Zed knew, nobody else has ever seen this colossal turtle, and came forward to talk about it. But Zed said that it was big enough that if it caught a person unaware, it could easily overpower and kill a human the same way it did that pig. Again, this is how the story was told to me. It's not my story, and I'm inclined to mostly believe it's a tall tale, or an exaggerated one, but it does highlight that you don't need something as fanciful as a skunk ape or Bigfoot to be nervous about what might be lurking out of sight. In 2010 or so, a buddy and I headed out trout spearing, or tribal, on a small creek that flows into Lake Superior. A few key points. It has a few slight turns, but it's fairly straight and rocky, as the land drops pretty good down to the lake. This is 2 to 3 a.m. on a cold, wet spring night. This is heavily wooded and thinly populated BFE. Ain't no one around here. Nearest house is maybe 1.5 miles away. 2 things happened that night that, to this day, we cannot explain. We were working our way downstream using headlamps to spot trout. We noticed a red light in the distance that didn't belong there. Like if you were seeing the aviation light on top of a radio tower. We fish on and we notice that the light is still with us. I remember thinking, it's a cigarette, and someone's being an ass and is creeping on us. I bust up the bank, and the light now appears miles away. This happened a few more times. It looks as if it's right there, then as you move to it, it appears farther away. Again, this is out in the sticks. There are no towers or anything topped with a light. No houses, no close roads. We were a little curious, and stumped, but we fished on. And then, it goes south. The second event, we're on the east bank heading north, being downriver. We're hoofing it because we have our limit, and that red light is creepy. We climb up the bank to get around a windfall and the remnant of a huge long-gone beaver dam. I'd say we were up on the bank and moving downriver for maybe 60 yards. We scramble back down to the water's edge, and the freaking river is flowing the other way. This is a fairly straight river. No oxbows. We've fished it. We know it. The world is freaking upside down. We're not turned around on a bend. Add this to the red light, and we sort of looked at each other, and my buddy nodded his head to the west, which ought to be straight across the river, because to the right, or north, is Lake Superior, which is downriver, and left is south to the beaver ponds. But the river has flipped, so west? Anyway, my buddy nods west and says, "Let's go." We beelined it to the nearest road, which was right where it was supposed to be. Dead west. And we hoofed it back to the truck. I spent a lot of time on what passed for Google Earth back then, trying to figure out what light we saw and how we got upside down on the river. It's just not possible. The river cannot shesh uphill that far inland, and up that gradient. It's just baffling. And I think about it all the time. So that was a collection of some true scary stories involving the woods, in the woods, deep woods, however you want to put that. Scary things happening in big, tree-filled areas. One of them was kind of in the swamps, but they said the swamps was surrounded by woods, so I'm accepting that as an in-the-woods story. And if you don't accept that as an in-the-woods story, well, I'm sorry, but this isn't your channel and this isn't your video. It's mine. Yeah. Anyways, scary in-the-woods stories. Typically good stories here. Stories where being in the woods is just kind of a terrifying thing. Like, if you can find, like, a really big forested area with no people, it can get kind of terrifying. Living where I live, most places, though, are suburban, and any woods end very quickly with houses. Whenever I was a kid, the house we used to live at, though, had a big patch of woods near it. Not, like, gigantic, but, decent sized. But there were houses on all ends, so, again, if you just kept going in any direction, you'd end up hitting a house somewhere. I don't have any, like, scary in-the-woods stories, I guess. Whenever I was a kid, my oldest sister tried to convince us that there was some sort of wolf thing in the woods near our house. She drew up this fake poster and everything, so. Did it work? I don't know, I was a kid. Probably not. Mostly because I was a little more logical than that. I may have been young and, impressionable and kind of silly with things, but I wasn't stupid. I'm not stupid. Just a little stupid. No, but jokes aside there, I don't think I fell for it. I just remember her trying, like, really hard. But she was older. She was a teenager and I was a kid, so. Whatever. It is what it is. My childhood friends would know what I'm talking about because they were also part of the con. Yeah. So, I don't really have any scary stories beyond that. And it was fake, so. I don't know what my point there was. Anyways, friends, hopefully you enjoyed this collection of stories, this video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. That would help tremendously, as it helps push the video harder. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, as it pushes my channel into feeds harder. And you can also leave me a comment on this video with your thoughts. If you have any scary stories in the woods, send them my way. Go to astheravendreams.com. There's a big button to submit your story. And yeah. Not much else to say. Join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this. Never expected, always appreciated. And there's also the thanks button, which is super thanks, and it's just a tip to the channel, kind of like a, hey, I support your channel but don't want to do so monthly kind of thing. And that's okay. I appreciate it either way. All that said, friends, hope you're having a beautiful week so far. Hope I do see you again here very soon. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and please don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, much love, and sleep well.